Now, purpose has certainly been the buzzword in marketing and branding for quite some time. I think it's probably been popularized by Simon Sinek's famous Golden Circle model, and that he goes on to explain that the real differentiator between companies and what makes consumers flock to them is because of their why. Now, I really have no doubt that answering the why question is both extremely gratifying as well as probably a nice motivator to improve your team's morale across the company. The question is, does it really do what it says on the tin and actually act as a rallying cry for consumers to prefer your brand over another? Well, hey, that's the question I'm going to attempt to answer. Now, like many things in marketing, the answer is quite honestly a bit of a it depends. There are conflicting reports here. So a useful place to start is to introduce one that takes a more balanced approach on the subject. Now, a while ago, the legend Peter Thiel attempted to put a rubber stamp to this question on whether investing in and shouting about your purpose will drive incremental sales and value for your organization. Now, his conclusions was kind of interesting in that it was a bit of a yes, but it does depend answer. He nicely sums up his findings in one sentence. So when brand purpose is done well, it can be incredibly effective. But to be good, there are particular learnings to observe. So in essence, what he says is the devil really is in the detail. So let's dive into that detail and see what we can find. Now, the study showed that the average number of very large business effects for all non-purpose campaigns stood at around 1.6. For brand purpose campaigns, this figure stands markedly lower at 1.1. This suggests that purpose campaigns can actually have a negative effect compared to non-purpose campaigns. However, on closer inspection of the data, and when looking at the most successful purpose-driven campaigns, it's clear that they've actually enjoyed much stronger business effects. The number of very large business effects for strong purpose cases is around 2.1 versus the benchmark of 1.6. So this does show us that when you do get it right, it can be transformational. Whilst getting it wrong, well, it could mean that you're better off not doing it in the first place. Now, another study from Kantar does reinforce this point, suggesting that brands that have been recognized for high commitment to purchase have grown at more than twice the rate of others, including brands like Toyota, Nike, UPS, and Google. So kicking back to Field's recommendations, he does say that if a brand is going down this road, it is important to learn lessons from the best in the business in this respect in order to give yourself the best chance of succeeding in this area. However, and I would say crucially, when delving into the data further, it is clear that there is a sharp and explainable difference between strongly executed brand purpose cases and ones that are weakly executed. By studying the 57% of brand purpose cases that perform strongly, Field does observe the considerable potential rewards of the approach and the key features of strong campaigns. He argues that many more brand purpose campaigns could enjoy these rewards if they did learn the lessons from successful ones. So look, Field does have 4 key takeaways that we can all benefit from finding more about. The first one is physical availability. So strong cases work closely with distributors aligned to purpose to develop bespoke in-store presence. The second is mental availability and distinctiveness. Strong cases clearly align purpose to product virtues and benefits and ensure they are credible. The third is penetration growth. Strong cases use purpose to strengthen association with category entry points. And fourth, mass appeal. So strong cases align purpose to popular issues amongst their target audience. So there you go, 4 key things to bear in mind. Now, there have been numerous examples of real purpose-driven organizations, but perhaps the most well-known is Unilever, which puts social and environmental conscious on par with profit-making. In fact, its CEO, Alan Jobe, has come out with compelling evidence to suggest that brands that have a purpose do outperform those that do not in their portfolio. It's become so compelling that actually it's being used as one of the criteria to determine if a brand remains in their portfolio. Now that's pretty compelling stuff. However, a bit of note of caution when trying to reinvent the wheel, so to speak. It's unlikely that many brands will have the corporate clout and budgets of Unilever, and therefore when assessing it against Field's research, you can imagine that many Unilever portfolio brands would have fallen into the top category of purpose high achievers, whilst many other, say, mere mortal brands may not be able to truly live up to these higher standards of attainment. Now, I'm not saying we shouldn't all strive for better and more purposeful driven companies that do better for our societies and environments. I'm simply saying how much we hang our brands' hats on, so to speak, is at the heart of this question, and it's very much contextual and brand dependent. In fact, during recessionary times, the role and perception of purpose amongst consumers has shifted quite dramatically as well. So the lens narrows and becomes more about what brands are doing for consumers during their time of need, say when prices are rising, over some more societal elements that are higher to achieve or a higher level to achieve. Now, we have seen this of late with companies such as P&G, suggesting that we have swung the pendulum too far in the purpose direction, and we do need to bring it back to the profit area as well. Now look, just the other day, I heard the most profound 6 letters that I think reframes Simon Sinek's Golden Circle and gets us closer to thinking about the interaction between purpose and promise. It's called me, we, and us, and it's from the legendary Magnus Jaba, the Chief Client Officer of Publicis Groupe. Now, in conversation, we were debating about how marketers should create real and lasting change. Now, Magnus eloquently just said, well, most people think from inside out, starting with me, then we, to mean their families and inner circles, and then us, to mean wider societal and community gains. So as marketers, when trying to develop a marketing strategy to effect wide change, we do need to firstly ask ourselves, what is in it for the consumer? Then, how does it benefit, say, their inner circle, which is their families and friends? And then finally, how will it positively contribute to the wider impact which the consumer cares about? I do think this is also a great framework to consider when developing a hierarchy of messaging for any communication. Start with me, then we, and then us. Now, it feels like in recessionary times, we go back to the innermost part of the circle, which leads us to thinking about the promise that our brands deliver to the consumer. It's the utility and the reason why the product exists, and the promise is the product benefit that a consumer will get when they do make that purchase. For instance, whether it be Primark's promise of good quality clothing at affordable prices, or M&S's promise of, say, the highest quality food at fair but above average price. It's that simple point of genuinely doing exactly what is said on the tin and ensuring that this is delivered consistently each and every time. Now, to me, communicating the promise in a compelling and emotive way can also be a driving force for value for the brand. Now, there really is no simple answer here, and I would put both purpose and promise on a continuum, where it's a marketer's job to decide the blended balance of communicating a company's purpose and promise. Now, to help decide, I would consider 2 dimensions. On the one hand, you need to determine exactly what does the product actually solve and where you need to draw the line. The second dimension is when does the consumer stop caring about how far the product benefit solves problems that are wider and bigger than themselves. So look, let's take an example to bring this to life. Let's take a bag of fairly standard crisps. Now, while browsing through the supermarket shelves, consumers are really bombarded with so many options of crisp brands, crisp textures, and crisp flavors. In many ways, it really is a complex choice based on a multi-sensory approach. Their eyes judging the packaging, the taste buds scouring the flavors, and their fingertips feeling the texture, and perhaps they will be looking at the ingredients for the more health-conscious ones out there. Now, not to mention, the mind is searching for associations, even recall, and other subconscious things in search for the perfect choice. Now, in that moment, the brand promise presents a strong case for whichever brand they do choose. They can be assured that the crisps will be delivered in a crunchy and tasty way that suffices their hunger in that moment. And for the more health-conscious of us, they will be looking for more psychological satisfaction in choosing a healthier option. Overall, it makes the consumer feel fulfilled and content. Now, the question is how much of the high road of purpose does creep into the decision-making process in that moment? I mean, does the consumer even care that the brand sponsors certain charities, is carbon neutral, or indeed is striving for global peace? Okay, look, that might be a bit of a stretch in the last one, but I do so for a fact, since at some point the consumer may just want to enjoy the bag of crisps, And whilst they may care about how the company operates, it begins to be a bit of a sliding scale, particularly as the image gets more nebulous and removed from their reality. So I'm saying when it does come to the balance of purpose and promise, know when to draw the line. Know when to highlight the product benefit or the promise, and know when it's right to signal the brand purpose. Now, in my experience, weighing too heavily on purpose at the expense of the promise is just not a great idea. Even some of the most purposeful brands, I don't know, say Ben & Jerry's ice cream, carefully dials up and down their purpose. But it doesn't get in the way of them focusing on great flavors and customer delight, which really does sit at the heart of their brand's promise. I will say on purpose that there is also a lot of greenwashing afoot across the industry, which is where purpose is being used as an almost frivolous and inauthentic way. Now, this can create significant brand damage in the long term, so I would say it's a clear watch out to be careful of. Now, let me leave you with Hamish Golding, Global Head of Brand at HSBC, as he reflects on the role of brand purpose and values.
If you dig a bit deeper into the whole purpose piece, it's been an interesting journey for the industry and business in general. So above brand purpose, you've actually got corporate purpose, and that is a thing that the boardrooms have woken up to through things like Simon Sinek and Why, How, What, and all that. And that's the situation we were in, as our CEO said, and chairman said, we need to look at our corporate purpose, our strategy and values. How do we bring them all together? And didn't even mention brand at that point. You think of the sort of marketing and ad industry talking about brand purpose. Are they different? Are they the same thing? There is a degree where I think all of this is emperor's new clothes. It's about what is your strategy and direction and vision as a company. In the old days, it would have been called a vision, and now it's called a purpose or a brand purpose. So I think there's a degree where it's just all the same stuff. And in brand circles, there's brand idea, brand purpose, brand positioning. There's so many different ways, we frame these things, and there's always a new one every year as to what we need to be. Ultimately, it's about what's your vision, what's the big idea that brings this whole story together, and how do you bring it to life? And in the old days, it was basically ads and product, and now it's almost like products, experiences, services brought to life furthermore by some ads. And that's kind of how brand and purpose kind of comes to life. But the less ideas you can have in an organization, the better, I would say. It's about singularity of focus.
The interesting thing around that is, I guess, perhaps me linking into the corporate purpose and the like, is that purpose has become synonymous with things like the UN Sustainable Goals, for instance, and latching onto a number of them because it's sort of helping that wider society environmental solution or problem. Is that the way that you see it in terms of living out an organization's purpose as it always linked to a societal goal, or can it be different from that?
Yeah, that's the other half of this conversation, isn't it? It's the what's the baggage that goes along with purpose? Because purpose seems to imply a sort of Patagonia-esque B Corp NGO status to any company, and we had that exact same thing. It's like, well, we're a bank. Yeah, we did when we were doing the territories on opening up a world of opportunity for HSBC. That we had things about sustainable development, sustainable growth, sustainable prosperity, and so on. And the feeling in the bank was, well, that's table stakes. Everyone's going to have to be sustainable because that's what the world needs to do. So by focusing on opening up a world of opportunity, it was big and stretchy enough for all those types of customers we've got, 42 million, but also gives a singular sense of direction and focus. So yeah, I think the baggage that goes with purpose, you've got to walk the walk, haven't you, at the end of the day? I mean, the Patagonia example is the one that everyone's talking about at the moment, and the sort of essentially giving away the profits they make to fight climate change. That's the definition. That's the highest table of purpose. What does that look like in a rising cost of living, and people choose brands based on their organic credentials and their B Corp status and all that kind of thing? What happens when you can't afford to eat? And where do you start making choices, or do your mortgage repayments or what have you? So there's that. I think society progresses, so choices become hardwired. I don't think you necessarily go backwards in terms of your values and so on. but there are trade-offs with everything, and that will have severe implications. I mean, the bigger, deeper point is around the shift from sort of stakeholder capitalism, and I think that's the kind of holy grail. That'd be amazing if we could get there, because that would do a much more balanced approach to building business, a much more balanced approach to integrating business in community. But it's a different model, and it's not as commercial. I just think in the way, it's funny, I was watching the Greta Thunberg interview the other day. I mean, she speaks so simply and straightforward about this kind of stuff. And yes, she's an idealist by a long way, but what a fantastic kind of simplistic way of looking at the world and what needs to change. Things like stakeholder capitalism are just one small step forward, but that's not going to drive your shareholder value in the short term, and that's the problem. So unfortunately, society is set up a bit wrong in that sense. So corporate purpose is a good step, but is it going to get us all the way to where we need to be in this sort of current climate? I think it's unlikely.